My name is Adam Birkenstock. I am the Director of Programming at the Long Island Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence. We are a non-for-profit in Suffolk and Nassau County that assists people in connecting to treatment, OMH, OASIS treatment, whatever sort of treatment is going to assist them in their journey. We primarily help people dealing with substance use issues, but as many people know, a lot of underlying issues affect us all. So we often assist people with mental health concerns as well, and we'll provide brief counseling for people. We have all licensed healthcare workers on staff. So we'll provide brief counseling to assist people in addressing the issues underneath to get them to the right frame of mind to accept the help that they need, which is in the hands of many of the good people who are joining us today, and often out in the great wider world of treatment. So one of the big things that we do is we provide education and supportive counseling and supportive webinars out to people. So we have traditionally done this face to face, but we get to do this face to participants window now. So I am excited to talk to you guys a little bit today about anxiety, something that I think we'll all find pretty relevant in the world that we're living in right now. In the midst of a pandemic, it's hard not to feel a sense of anxiety. It's hard not to feel a little uncomfortable at times. It's hard not to feel all sorts of things that for some of us may feel a little bit typical. For some of us may feel really unusual. We may be used to a level of anxiety, but this may be a level we're not used to. We may not be comfortable with feelings of anxiety, and suddenly we find anxiety is kind of set upon us. And we may also find that our symptoms are different. We also find that the signs of anxiety we're used to aren't the signs that are coming up for us because this is really an unprecedented time. I've almost said it so much and heard it said so much that I get really tired of the word unprecedented. And I find myself saying that about lots of words, and you may hear me say that again throughout this half hour, but it's um, it's really truly an unprecedented time that we're living through, and it's worth looking at with new eyes. So when we think about coping with anxiety, I thought a good place to start was just defining anxiety. We're probably feeling it a little bit right now, right? It's something that's really common. It's something that's really normal for us to feel. The first thing I usually like to say before we jump into a real definition is that anxiety is a normal feeling. Anxiety is a common human experience. There are maybe a few people who don't feel anxiety ever in their life, but it is atypical for someone to never experience anxiety. We all experience anxiety at some point. For a portion of the population, will experience it more frequently than others, maybe on a regular basis. And then for a percentage of us, will experience maybe an anxiety disorder, something like generalized anxiety disorder, where our anxiety persists pretty often, maybe most of the day, often not attached to any particular source of worry, but just a general sense that I'm worrying about things excessively. It may also be attached to something like a specific fear or a phobia, a source of panic. It may be attached to a particular thing that's creating anxiety. So it may endure for our lives or it may not. It may be temporary. And it could also be symptoms of other larger things. So to be specific, it's a collection of fear-based feelings, including excessive worry and or the challenges of controlling worrying thoughts and the related negative outcomes of that, which includes things like restlessness, irritability, fatigue, muscle aches, and difficulty sleeping. So this isn't everything that comes out of it, but the reason that I phrase it this way is that anxiety itself is really about those fear-based feelings. And we'll usually separate anxiety and fear, that fear is a bit of a stronger emotion. Fear is a little more intense and usually about something specific, although not always. But anxiety is fear-based. There's a sense of fear that comes along with it. And then when it comes to that excessive worrying and that difficulty in controlling a worry thought or a thought of concern, What comes out of that worry, what comes out of our anxiety are things like restlessness, challenges in settling ourselves down and reducing our ambient energy, let's say. Um, Feeling irritable because maybe we're really frustrated in general with our anxiety or with the situation that's creating our anxiety. So we have irritability around us. And it's not that we are irritable because of anxiety, or that anxiety exists. And then as a part of anxiety, we're irritable, but the anxiety creates our irritability. Fatigue as well, that we feel exhausted by the anxiety, that difficulty sleeping is connected as well. We might be staying up late, thinking about those worrisome thoughts, and muscle aches too, because we will find ourselves tensing often because of our anxiety, because of this persistent stress. And this is something that I find really important to highlight, is that when we think about our emotions and we think about our anxieties and our stresses, we have a tendency to think about these things as existing really just up here and them being mental phenomenon. And that's okay. It's not wrong, right? These things do exist in our minds. They exist in our brains, but our brains are a part of our bodies too. And while we have most of our nerves and our nerve endings in our brain, right, a trillion of them, there's nerves and nerve endings throughout our body. And the communication of that stress goes down into our body. We get responses that maybe trigger stress from our body, depending on what's going on. And the results of stress, the results of anxiety can lead to things like the release of stress hormones like cortisol. It can lead to things like muscle aches because we are tensing our body. The anxiety response, the anxiety reaction is really closely tied to that fight or flight or fight, flight, or freeze reaction that is a part of the way that our brain works. And because of that, it's a normal response, but it also affects how our body works. So it is going to change how our blood is flowing. It's going to change how we're breathing. It's going to change what our muscles are doing, because that fight, flight, or freeze response is getting us ready to, and this is the example I love to use, run from a bear, fight a bear, or freeze. So hopefully that bear goes away. But are we dealing with bears right now? We're not, right? We're dealing with a virus. We're dealing with something that's invisible to our eye. We're dealing with something that can feel really tough to get solid information about, although thankfully we get better information all the time. We're dealing with a kind of large amorphous threat that's ongoing. A bear that's outside of our cabin that we can't see, that's a present threat for over a month now, a month and a half. And that's not a situation that our bodies were necessarily built for when it comes to anxiety. Anxiety is meant to help us to survive those brief interactions, those brief moments, to help us become hyper aware and hyperactive to survive. When it's active over this period of time, it kind of wreaks havoc. It makes us not sleep enough. It makes our bodies achy, fatigued, and it can lead to other issues as well. So, some of those other signs that people might notice when it comes to anxiety are things like having difficulty concentrating because of that fatigue and the effects it has on our brain overall, muscle aches and soreness, irritability, the excessive worry that we think in our thoughts. We can have repetitive thoughts, so that may sound like the same thing coming up on our minds over and over, or really similar thoughts, right? I'm not going to do well. I can't succeed at this. I'm not good enough, are all really versions of the same thought. And we might have a blank mind too, that we wouldn't normally think of as a part of anxiety, but it's because we're pulling away from those stressful thoughts because they're painful, they're challenging. We don't know what to do with them. Very often, there is nothing we can do with them. And we begin to pull away from those thoughts and really dissociate from them. But still, that feeling of anxiety is what underlies the entire experience. We also can have things like GI, our gastrointestinal system, can be in distress because it's very closely connected with our brains, especially when it comes to stress and hormones like cortisol. So we may have upset stomach and upset intestines from this. Unprompted fear feelings can come up, and also shortness of breath can happen. We may also see anxiety coincide with things like panic. So, really intense feelings of fear, that shortness of breath comes along with it. We may feel totally knocked out by that sense. Also, coming along with depression, sometimes we get so tired of fighting, we just want to kind of lie down and we sort of feel like giving up. That can be an anxiety related depression. And with mania too, that really intense energy. We want to get things done. We're feeling so up and active that we feel like we can do anything, or we feel really, really angry and this intense emotion. And that can be clinical, or it can just be, I don't know what to do. I've been trapped in kind of, we would call it cabin fever almost. So we have to think about how we deal with these things. Mindfulness is another one of those words that I think we hear so often and in so many contexts that it's hard to know exactly what to make of it. I'm only going to talk about it a little bit today. So what the goal is with mindfulness, um, we had a question here about the differences between anxiety and stress. So anxiety is really about that persistent worrying thought. Stress is kind of that bodily reaction. They can come alongside each other. So they kind of coexist. Anxiety is about the cognitive, about the worrying thoughts. So that's where I want to focus us really today, and it'll help our bodies to feel better. So really, all I want to mention about the mindfulness is that we can use a mindful approach to just be more aware of what's going on for us so that we can get in the way of anxious thoughts and we can get in the way of the kinds of thought patterns that are maybe taking us down, that are getting in the way of us feeling productive, getting in the way of us feeling like we can relax. And that's what anxiety really takes us away from. So when we take a mindful approach, what I mean is if something has become mindless, if something has become something that is an unhealthy distraction or an unhealthy thing for me, I want to be able to be aware of it and present with it enough to be able to do something about it. So one of the things that I think is really helpful in a time like this is digital mindfulness because we are glued to our computers now, right? You're here with me on the computer now. So being able to look at the computer itself, being on the computer, which is full of distractions, being on our phones all the time, right? Because we're often working from home, we're receiving a lot of calls. I know sometimes, depending on the way that our phone systems work through our jobs, we're also really connected to our phones for longer periods of time because maybe we're getting our phone ringing a lot more than usual. We have to know why we're engaging with our phone and try to use mindfulness for these things. So we want to have an opportunity when we feel down, when we feel bored because we're isolated, learning to accept some level of boredom, that boredom is a normal, natural part of the world, that maybe this level of boredom and disconnection is different, but can I understand? Can I see what's going on? And instead of just saying, I'm irritated, I'm frustrated, because 100% we are, and that's natural as a response. Can I understand my level of irritation and frustration? And then seeing what happens in those moments where I can be distant from my phone. What are the feelings that rise up for me, and what do I want to do with them? And we'll talk again about how we deal with those thoughts, those anxious thoughts that come up. Learning to kind of lean into the challenge instead of distracting with our phones, which are full of those distractions, or distract with our computers. Um, Instead of scrolling through posts, instead of going to videos, learning to lean into those challenges. So the things we want to ask ourselves, because we are going to be engaged with technology a lot, we are going to have useful forms of technology that we can use. We want to ask, how much am I using my technology? And what am I using it for? Um, is this something I'm using just for work? Am I working too much? Am I not giving myself healthy boundaries between when I'm at work versus when I'm at home? Do I have separate spaces? Do I have a time set up when my use of my phone converts over to my home use? And am I engaging with my phone or my devices in an active way? So, what I mean by that is when I'm on Instagram, am I mostly following people, checking in with what people I know are doing, what's going on in their lives? Do I post out for people? Am I active in that way? Do I engage actively, as in having conversations with my friends when I see that they're doing something online, picking up the phone and maybe calling them? Do I engage in a text conversation or a direct message? Or do I more passively scroll, see that something's going on, hit like, and then keep scrolling to get the next distraction? Because when I'm scrolling just to get the distraction, it's less healthy. But when I'm engaged actively, I'm still getting some sense of positive, healthy distraction and support. And why does this stuff feel important and helpful to me? Is this something that I am enjoying, or is this something that's just taking me away from something painful? So, one of the tools that I really enjoy for managing stress is something called Distract. And it's an acronym for crisis survival, actually, which is perfect for the time that we're in. And distract stands for the following. D stands for do something else. So when the thing that we're engaged in is causing us the anxiety, is causing a worrying thought. So when we hear that thought running in our head over and over again, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, or this feels impossible, I don't know what to do with this. Instead, get up and do something else. In self-help communities, this is called move a muscle, change a thought. And this can be really helpful, actually physically standing up, maybe even doing some light exercise, even walking around the house or around the block, doing something else, imagining something else. So letting our minds float away to a different thing. And if we ever feel pulled back or pulled in a different direction, just saying, okay, and this is a mindful skill, right, that we can incorporate. Okay, I'm being pulled back to my anxiety. That's an anxious thought, but right now I'm imagining this. Using our senses. So if we're stuck in our brains, can I sense something that helps me to distract? I really like actually those fidget spinners and fidget cubes because we can use our sense of touch to cue into that and distract with our sense of touch away from the anxious thought until our physical sensation of anxiety goes down. And then we can engage with that thought more healthily. The sense of smell is also really great. Cooking can be a really great way to distract in a healthy way, engage our senses, and then once we feel less anxious, we can come back to that challenging thing. Try to think about something else or remember better times. And remember that in the grand scheme of things, those better times are still a part of our story. Accept that challenges are a part of life, so recognize that these are not insurmountable. This is a part of the experience we have, and we can grow and learn from that. And that's what create meanings is. So instead of viewing this as an impossible thing, viewing this as a um, just as a disaster, saying, what meaning can I make from this anxiety, from this really difficult and challenging experience? This is a hard one, but it's something that we can do over time. And then the other thing is called take opposite action. So this is a really great tool for when we tend to go to unhealthy coping skills, and those can be things like overeating, like drinking if we feel like we drink too much. These can be things like scrolling on our phone too much. If we feel the pull towards something that's just going to distract us temporarily and then we're back in our anxious thoughts, instead of allowing us to maybe process that feeling a little bit and then come back in a healthier way, we can take an opposite action. So instead of going on my phone, taking my phone and putting it in the drawer, which maybe you heard on my microphone. So putting it away, and that way I have taken an opposite action. I've also moved a muscle, I've changed my thought, and I can engage in something else in order to manage my stress. Now, other things that we can do fall into these four major categories. The last one is mindfulness, and those include things like meditation, include things like mindful eating, which is a meditative practice. I think you guys might have heard about Zentangles if you had done the one from yesterday, and then something like digital downtime. But self-expression is also a really important tool because this takes our thoughts and redirects them in a healthy way. And it allows that feeling, the emotion that we're going through, the anxious thought, to have an outlet that's in a different direction. Because right now, what we have is this cycling thought that's not going anywhere. The energy is just like a runaway train on a circular track. And what we want to do is take that energy and put it somewhere else. So we don't need to take out the paint set and say, I'm going to paint my anxiety today. We can, just paint flowers, we can paint whatever, but allowing that energy that we have within us, allowing our creative energy out, can often release some of the emotional things we have going on, can allow some of what's working inside our heads to just release a little bit. We can also do this with things like journaling, listening to music, playing music, creating any kind of art can be really, really helpful at times like these. I'm talking to a lot more people about what really works for them for self-expression. For me, it's telling stories. I, will write a little more, and a lot of that is stories that aren't even so great, but I write anyway, and it can help to get my thoughts out of my head. And sometimes those anxious thoughts will come out of my mind too in the story, and whether I keep them or not, it doesn't really matter. As long as that creative energy has a chance to flow, it helps manage that anxiety. Staying active is also super important, and I know it can be a big challenge during a experience like this. Exercise can be helpful, so utilizing things like stay-at-home workouts, utilizing resources, whether free or affordable, to do video-based workouts, for example, at home. Yoga activities would be a great option. Also, just getting up and walking around the block can be a great, great option. Being sure that we're not too locked in our own houses is really critical. Taking a walk, and we can walk with friends, especially if we're wearing a mask and we're maintaining social distancing. We can have that experience. And yoga, again, some stretching, just to be able to engage and feel physically our bodies is really important. I mentioned before that everyone experiences anxiety, and one perspective I like to share with people is that when I say that anxiety is meant to help us survive situations, we can imagine our anxiety as whatever works for you. I don't want to give you a predisposed notion, but you could take a moment to think, when my anxiety comes up, how would I personify, how would I imagine my anxiety as something, if it walked up to me and said, I'm sharing a message with you, I'm trying to help you survive this situation. What would it look like to me? What would it say? What would it do? Because that's what my anxiety is trying to do. It may feel awful. I may feel like I hate it sometimes. But what my anxiety is trying to do is be helpful, even if it's hurting me in the process. And when we look at it in that way, it sometimes gives us a chance to shift the dialogue we have internally instead of fighting with our anxiety, which often doesn't help. It's why things like thought stopping techniques can be really so helpful for some people, but are often less helpful in the long run, which are things like, oh, this anxious thought comes up, and I just say stop, or I clap my hands together and I try to make the thought go away. When we fight with the thought, it often just gets pushed a little bit away and then it comes back. But if that anxiety comes up and I can say to myself and to my anxiety, I know that you are trying to help me. I know that my anxiety is trying to help me. And I appreciate that that feeling is there, but I don't need it right now. So you can go or you can hang out. But if you could be calm for right now, I'm going to handle this experience in a different way, in a non anxiety fueled way. That can be really, really helpful for people. And I love talking with people about that and finding out, so what does your anxiety look like? What does it feel like to you? And what do you say to your anxiety when you need it to kind of take a step back so that you can handle the situation? And a big piece can be confiding in others, reaching out to them, picking up the phone, getting on a Zoom call, sometimes going to anyone you would for some form of guidance, sometimes therapy, and speaking to people who you trust can be a really, really important thing. One technique that I like for managing anxiety when it gets overwhelming, and this can be when you have a sense of panic going on, is called square breathing. Now, you may have seen this on Facebook because I posted a video about it, um, but it didn't get all that many views, so maybe not. So, square breathing is a Zen technique. It's a skill that allows for grounding. And the idea is we're taking ourselves out of our heads, getting back in touch with our body and saying, okay, how much do I need to be anxious? How much do I need to be worrying right now? Can I get in touch with what's going on? in the world right now, or just in my body in the present. And the idea is we're going to breathe in for 4 seconds, hold our breath in for 4 seconds, then breathe out for 4 seconds, and leave that breath out. Hold the breath out for 4 seconds. And we'll do that as many times as we need. So I encourage you to try it just 1 or 2 times right now. I'll do it and do some counting for you. So we breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. Hold it out, 2, 3, 4. In, 2, 3, 4. Hold it, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. And hold it out, 2, 3, 4. And you can continue to do that as long as you need. What that does is takes our body from a place of thinking, I'm in danger, to a place of, I must be okay because I can control my breathing. I can decide how I breathe. To make it even more effective, we can do belly breathing, which is instead of breathing just into our chest, where we see our chest lift up, we can breathe down into our belly and feel our belly expand. I joke sometimes when I do this in person to say, you're going to see me go from nothing to 4 months pregnant because my belly sticks out a lot when I do this breathing. But it can be a very comforting and very fulfilling experience to breathe into your stomach. And that also sends a physical signal to your brain that you are safe, you are comfortable, and you're all right. So that square breathing is a really, really helpful tool to give your brain that sign that it's okay to release and relax. And then you can go back to that thought and say, okay, am I okay right now? Do I need to hold on to this thought? So there are some apps that I wanted to also share with you that I think are very helpful. These all can help with anxiety. Some of them are mindfulness based. Others offer guided meditations, which I think of guided meditations much less as mindfulness and more as a way to use a more of a cognitive, a thought technique to say, I want to take myself away. I want to use that distract tool, get away from my current thought, go to a pleasant thought, imagine something positive and see when I come back, how much of that anxiety is really still there. And then whatever's still there, I'm going to go ahead and I'll sit with it and I'll try to deal with. And if it's still a looping thought, then I can say, hey, is it okay, anxiety, if I deal with this on my own terms, in my own way? Because I know you're trying to help me, but it's not going to really help me deal with this situation. So Calm is a great app that offers some guided meditations. Headspace is another one. And if you have an NPI number for any reason, you can, with your NPI number and a New York address, get Headspace for free now, completely for free. These have step-by-step meditations that build on each other, which is wonderful. These pictures on the right are what the app icons look like, and then the titles are there as well. Um, we have as well 10% happier, which I think is really, really great because this is further from the meditation crowd. It's really more of those guided imageries and it brings in the ideas of things like awareness and meditation more slowly. Those are afterthoughts. This is a lot more of the distract tool. And then Stop, Breathe, and Think is aimed at a younger audience. So if you have younger people in your lives who are struggling with anxiety and struggling with these feelings, it can be a really useful tool. It has a emotion tracker too, which I find is super helpful. This is another skill that people utilize where you mark down how stressed, how anxious am I feeling? And if I'm feeling very anxious, if my thoughts are repeating, what is my thought? What is my feeling? And then after I do something to help me with that thought, what is my thought afterwards? Or how can I change the thought? One of the things that we like to do with the technique with this thing like that is shift the way we're talking to ourselves. So if we find that our anxious thoughts are very negative, if they're very negative about ourselves, if we think, I can't do this, I feel overwhelmed, this is impossible, to take a step back listen, and sometimes write down those thoughts so you can see them in front of you. And then to the right of that, write the positive version of those thoughts and say, if it's I'm overwhelmed, saying I'm experiencing a lot of stress right now, be time limited. If it's I can't do this, saying I am feeling that I can't do this. Or if I reach out for help, I may feel better able to do this. I can accomplish this if I put my mind to it. Shift that conversation, that inner dialogue. That right now it's just an anxious thought in your mind. It's not proof of anything. It's not a guarantee of a lack of success. By shifting the way we speak to ourselves, we can begin to shift the reality of the world that we're engaged in. So by changing that positive talk, that's what Stop, Breathe, and Think starts to do for kids and build that positive self-talk. If you need any sort of support, any positive counseling, any sort of engagement for yourself, you can always give us a call as well. Our number is 631-979-1700. We're available 24/7. You can call us anytime. We provide telehealth support as well, and that's always going to be free for county employees. So 631-979-1700 for any kind of support that you need, just let us know. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and I will see you guys maybe at the next one. Take care, guys, and have a very good weekend. Take some deep square breaths if you're feeling anxious, and take care.